Now before you say anything, yes, I already made a video on the EU, but since then, the devs have already released 2 new paths, including an actual path for Klaus Schwab and another one for Federalizing, and you best believe we're gonna cover that one right after this video. But without further ado, grab your favorite bottle of Soylent and enjoy the video. So we fast forward to the end of the First European War, where Russia has somehow achieved victory against all of NATO. And I know how that sounds, but stay with me here. In the aftermath, we would realize that Europe had to stand united against Russia to have any chance of defeating them in the future. And so, after Volt Europa secured the majority in the Bundestag, the European Union was officially federalized in Germany and the Benelux. But this was just the first step, and we had much more work to do. Next, we had to decide what kind of society the EU was going to be, and of course, we chose the techno-utopian ideal. Though I'm not so sure about the utopia part. Our defeat in the First European War demonstrated how inefficient the old economic system was, giving silly things like workers' rights, paid time off, or maternity leave. It's clear to me that we need a great reset. And as we carried out our great reset, the pro-EU forces rebelled against the brutal regime of Nigel Farage. And even though it gets crushed 90% of the time, I still took those odds and sent in some volunteers. We arrived just in time to retake Manchester from the Brits and encircled some of the British army while we were at it. We continued our blitz to the south towards London and had the displeasure of meeting some Birmingham residents.
Come to Birmingham! Come to fucking Birmingham! So I can pull you!
We had isolated the Brits to the area around the hive city of London when Nigel contacted the Warp to summon another 100,000 British troops. Even after we surrounded the city, the siege would continue as long as new British units spawned in. While that was going on in the background, we continued to a post-capitalist transition, which as you can see, is definitely the path we want for Schwab.
You will own nothing and be happy!
Back in Britain, London finally fell, and after crushing Scotland, the Euro-British Commission would join our faction. Now you guys may not know this, but Klaus Schwab is actually a huge weeaboo, and he wanted to introduce a very important aspect of Japan to Europe. Was it Japanese culture? Technology? I'm just kidding, it's Japanese economic stagnation. Next, we put out a news article warning of how cows could affect global warming, and to summarize, eating cows is reserved for the elites, while the rest of the peasants eats bugs to save the environment that we ruined.
Yum yum!
To everyone's shock, our citizens didn't actually want to live in the pod, and civil unrest began to rise in our cities. But I assure you, this will become more than just a ticking timer. You'll see near the end of this video. By setting new social standards, we would destroy long-term economic and societal connections, building a better, more responsible system in which you will own nothing and wealth will be distributed upwards. Good old trickle-up economics. And thanks to our work, the Fourth Industrial Revolution was now in full swing. It was now that Schwab would finally step out of the shadows and openly rule over all of Europe. With the facade now dropped, Schwab was free to fully carry out Agenda 2040. And oh boy, where do I even begin? Every time we clicked the decision to advance the agenda, our population growth completely plummeted and we were actively dying out. I could only wonder why.
Population control!
Next, Schwab's benefactors were rewarded with top positions in the government, which to be fair, is nothing new. But the European people no longer had any privacy nor any way to resist, so they would comply, and it was certainly going to get worse. But if there's anything good about living in this timeline, it's that you'll at least get some cybernetic enhancements. Is it any cool shit like mantis blades or gorilla arms? No, just a microchip to track your location and permanently suppress any negative emotions, which is really helpful for the 16-hour shifts you're gonna have to work to afford anything. And with the eradication of the useless, antiquated concepts of the middle class or national identities, Agenda 2040 was complete, and the European people had one final question to ask themselves. And yet, this new world order only existed within our borders, and thus, it was time to expand them. Firstly, we relieved the Spanish and the Portuguese of their unsustainable independence. The Italians joined up, and the Polish were just glad to be given a chance to get back at Russia, even if it means living under the worst regime in history. We also secured the Balkans. Wait a minute, this isn't even your video, get out of here. As I was saying, what remained of Europe that wasn't already under Russian control had now joined us, willingly or unwillingly. And now there was only one enemy left to face. The time had come for us to end the Russian experiment and liberate the oppressed peoples of Eastern Europe. On the fateful morning of April 1st, 2031, EU forces would cross the border. marking the beginning of the Second European War.
You will eat the bug! Yum yum! Population control! Jawohl! Thank you for your sacrifice! You will own nothing! Being the Great Reset! Jawohl! And be happy! I despise you! Green a clone so good!
So, to summarize what you just saw, we immediately began the war steamrolling through Poland and Hungary. Once Poland capitulated, our tanks spread out into the Baltics and into Ukraine to cut off the Balkans from Russia at the Black Sea. Having reached the Black Sea and cutting off the entire Balkan region from the rest of Russia, we destroyed any resistance from the Romanians and Bulgarians. We also sent an ultimatum to Finland for them to join the war and open the northern front. Since the choice was between attacking their former enemy or getting invaded by the EU, I think it's quite obvious what they decided to do. Along the way, we encircled as many units as we could, like in Budapest and Kiev, until the Russian army was a shell of its former self by the time we were advancing into Russia proper. With the fall of Moscow and St. Petersburg having fallen weeks before, the capture of Volgograd was the baseball bat to the knee that took out the Russian Federation once and for all. The parts of Russia that hadn't fallen under our control collapsed into a warlord era, allowing us to fully dominate the European continent. But our ambitions would not be satisfied so easily, and we would reveal as the next step of our plan. The new normal had been established in Europe, and now, Klaus would declare the formation of the world government, preparing to enlighten and uplift the rest of the world into our utopian society. But before we could fully realize our plans for global enlightenment, trouble began brewing on the home front. Remember earlier in the video when I said, this will become more than just a ticking timer. You'll see near the end of this video. Well, it turns out the destruction of the fundamental human experience had created a populace that was lonely, desperate, overworked, and angry. The only thing holding them back was the threat of surveillance and the microchips in their brains suppressing their worst emotions. But once those failed, there would be nothing left to contain their deepest, most animalistic urges. Event after event detailed the nightmarish life of those living in the new normal, isolated from social connection despite being overstimulated with advertisements every waking moment, and sacrificing their life in the pursuit of capital. The populace had finally reached their limit, and society began to break down with reports of violence and crime across the continent. All of this had finally culminated in the catharsis, as the broken people finally lashed out, resorting to their most animalistic desires, and carrying out random killings, terrorist attacks, lootings, and causing as much damage as humanly possible. Revolt after revolt erupted in every part of Europe. The British Isles were all but lost to the frothing madmen, which may have been an improvement, and the French formed the bulk of the revolting horde on mainland Europe. We scrambled the army to contain and destroy each of the pockets one by one, and it turns out that the army that had conquered Europe's land was now to conquer its soul. As our troops were met with rocks and Molotov cocktails, they responded in kind with indiscriminate bombings and missile strikes on Europe's ancient cities. I say revolt, but in truth, there was no ideology behind it. These revolters only abided by one law, that of the jungle, where, to paraphrase, the lion violates the small dog. Not only that, but they had already begun to cannibalize each other before we legalized it, really getting ahead of the whole Soylent Green thing. By this point, we were doing them a favor by putting them out of their misery, and slowly we clawed back each part of Europe, first the Benelux, then Italy, and finally the Iberian Peninsula. Soon, the EU forces would land in the abandoned British Isles, which probably looked like something out of 28 Days Later. The remaining rage infected were successfully cleared out of Great Britain by the army within 2 months. All in all, the suppression of the catharsis resulted in the deaths of over 13 million if not more, as well as the complete destruction of Europe's cities. But in the end, Klaus Schwab has managed to tame human nature and establish total control. And as the saying goes, there is no hope under the yellow globe and yellow stars. Of course, this wasn't the first and it certainly wouldn't be the last revolt. But it was out of Schwab's hands now. He would step down as leader of the world government. But it was in the final event of the game that we learned the identity of the true masterminds of the plan. A pair of enigmatic French twins who the world had thought dead since the pandemic were pulling the strings all along, with the authority to even order Klaus Schwab around. Well, if you stuck around this long, thank you for watching, I really appreciate it. In all honesty, this video doesn't do the path justice at all. I cut out so many memorable events and moments that you're really doing yourself a disservice by not playing it yourself, so go ahead and support the devs and play the path yourself. That's all I have to say.